You're listening to WSUW 91.7 FM. This is Yuri Rashkin, and you're listening to Rashkin Report. My next guest is VLADISLAV INOZEMTSEV, who is director of the Center for Post-Industrial Studies in Moscow. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, you are a very prolific author of some very controversial pieces that I think are viewed with much interest both in Russia and the United States, and I was hoping that we could start by taking a look at one of your most recent pieces in Newsweek, saying that lifting sanctions won't help Putin. And you end the story by saying that for the Europeans to be misled by false promises and to subjugate their political principles to illusionary economic benefits would be a huge and inexcusable mistake. What do you mean by that?
Look, it's a simple idea, because these days in Europe, a lot of people, a lot of policymakers are speculating about the necessity to lift the sanctions against Moscow, just because they don't help, as they see it, they don't help to resolve the conflict in the eastern Ukraine. And at the same time, they damage the economy of European nations, like, for example, Italy, Hungary, Slovakia, and some other countries are exceptionally active in trying to lift sanctions against Russia. Of course, when the sanctions... so my argument is very simple. When the sanctions were introduced, they, of course, disrupted some part of bilateral trade between Russia and Europe, and they also disrupted some financial flows, because the European banks were not allowed to produce new loans to Russian banks and companies. But since the sanctions were introduced, more than 1.5 years have already passed. So therefore, I would say that the Europeans should look on the different economic situation now existing in Russia, because these days ruble is devalued around 2 times against the dollar and euro, compared with 2014. The Russian market has contracted a lot. It is predominantly staffed by domestic produce. Also, if the financial operations are considered, there are too few projects in Russia which can yield, huge interest rates. So, in any case, it's an illusion that if the sanctions are lifted, the European companies will return to the Russian market and will get back their share of the market and will get all the benefits they enjoyed before the sanctions were introduced. So my point is that even the sanctions are lifted, the place which European companies can play in the Russian market will be very small, and therefore they will never regain the profits they hope to regain thinking about lifting of the sanctions. So that's it. It's just not working economically to lift the sanctions. And it will, of course, be depicted by the Kremlin as a big victory of Russia against Europe in the end.
To what extent do you feel this is all due to oil prices? Because, as you said, the economy has changed. The picture, the country that that these exporters have left a couple of years ago because of sanctions, it's not the same country that they would be coming back to. And in big part, it's because of the oil prices, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think there are 2 major factors in this case. First of all, are oil prices, because they deprived Russia of maybe 40% of export revenues. And the second point is, of course, the domestic economic policy of the government, because in recent years, since Mr. Putin returned to the Kremlin in 2012, it became more and more restrictive. And so, therefore, I think the major factor which contributes to Russian economic decline is actually the Russian domestic economic policies, because new taxes are introduced, new amounts of money are extracted from business by various schemes, and of course all this siloviki, as we used to call them in Russia, are influencing business more and more. The state is interfering more and more often. So in any case, I think that the first and the major issue in Russian economic in slowing Russian economy is, of course, the Russian domestic policy. And I can't see any, any signs that it will change soon. It will be more and more subjugated to the state. So Mr. Putin and his aides, I think, look on the private businesses like speculators who are just, here just to get more taxes from them, or the best they can do not to harm the state's interests. So such an attitude to the business, which is, prolific and predominant to Mr. Putin, so this is, I think, the major problem in Russia. The oil prices came second.
All right. Now, when you're saying business climate has changed, one of the things that has happened since the sanctions is, as you mentioned, a large push towards developing domestic producers. And while on the surface, so to say, it sounds like a great idea, let's help our local producers, the end result doesn't seem to be anything that the consumers are happy with.
Yeah, you're right. Because look, there are two problems. In some industries, in some branches, there are some results. I would say, first of all, in agriculture, because in agriculture you have a real surge of production, and which came also, I would say, alongside with the surge in domestic prices. Because the local producers now can, push prices higher, much ahead of inflation, just because they don't have any competitors. But nevertheless, in agricultural sector, in rural industries, you have a definite, upheaval. And in 2015, you have around 4 to 5% growth in agriculture. But this is, I think, only one branch which really benefited from the changes. Because in all other sectors, the dependence from imported goods or imported technologies is too big.